I'm writing this as a memoir of what happened while it's still fresh in my mind, and to share it with all the amazing people here. I've been reading all of you for almost a year now, and I feel like I should share my own story. I'll have to leave some details out for reasons you'll soon learn. This happened 1 year and 2 days ago. It was the day I never expected to come. It changed my life in so many ways that I still feel like I can't digest it all. I want to start by saying a little bit about myself, so you understand the context and why it was so weird and foreign for something like this to happen to someone like me. I'm a fairly geeky guy. I love science fiction and video games. I worked, at the time, as a design engineer in a factory, and spent most of my weekends with friends, hiking, playing board games, or just watching movies. So you realize nothing I did would attract the attention of the cartels. I don't have a lot of money. I just live a lower middle class type of life here in Mexico. But the real issue was my sister, who was a high-ranking position in the public security area of politics. And that's the reason I was targeted. It was a Tuesday morning. I was on my way to work, which started at 6 a.m. I remember that day I took my dad's SUV. I have a small sedan. Because they were away on vacation, and I was supposed to pick them up at the airport after work that day. I lived about half an hour away from my work, so I left at about 5:25 a.m. every morning. When I was leaving, I saw a pretty shady SUV parked about a block away from my house. Honestly, after my sister took her job, I was always more aware about things that I saw that were out of place. I felt a little bit paranoid because weeks before it happened, I had felt like someone had been following me. So yeah, I passed this SUV and saw a man in the driver's seat with a baseball cap. I stopped for a bit, looked him in the eye, and he just looked down and covered his face. I honestly didn't think too much of it. My family had been telling me weeks prior that I was overreacting and that no one was following me, so I thought it was just some random guy waiting for someone. I took off to work, and for me to get there I have to go through a really ugly neighborhood, which is poorly lit and had a really bad reputation. I was in a 2-lane street that's only one way. I was in the right lane at the time, and saw a Jeep Cherokee just speed by me on the left lane and then continue on its way in front of me. When we arrived at the end of the street, I had to turn right to get to work, but the Cherokee just completely stopped on the right lane in front of me, with their blinker signaling to the left. I found it weird, but I didn't want to be an asshole and honk at them, and wanted to give them a few more seconds to move. While I was waiting, an Explorer came screeching on the left lane. It stopped next to me, and 4 guys came out with guns and one with a baseball bat. The guy with the bat smashed my window and hit me in the face, while another put a gun to my head and said, "This is real, asshole. Get out of the car." So please understand that at the moment I didn't feel like they wanted to steal my car. I already knew they were trying to kidnap me. If I knew they just wanted the car, I would have given the car to them, but I pieced everything together. The cars that I felt were following me at night every day, the guy just sitting on the SUV outside of my place, and obviously my sister's job. I knew that if they took me, it would be torture followed by certain death, and if they really wanted to kidnap me, they would not kill me. So I stepped on the gas. I smashed between the Cherokee and the Explorer, and ran over one of the guys. I sped as much as the SUV would give me, and honked so I could make a lot of noise and people would notice. My hope was to get to my workplace, which had private security, and call my sister so she could notify the police. With all the adrenaline on me, I passed the entrance to my work and tried to turn back, but I crashed at a corner. At that moment, I honestly felt like my heart would come through my mouth. Everything moved so slow, so I tried to calm myself down. I breathed and saw through my mirrors if they were following me, but I saw no one. An empty street that was already lit by the morning dusk. The SUV was still working. I turned around, got to my work, yelled at the security guards to open the doors. I parked at the entrance, got out of the car and called my sister. After that, I went inside and talked to my boss about what had happened, and went to the restroom to clean the glass and blood off my hair and face. When I came out of the restroom and out to the parking lot, there were about 10 cop cars outside my workplace. My sister had already told me to speak with a specific police officer and confirm his name. Everything went smooth, and I felt safe and protected. After that, I moved into my sister's house, which has police guarding it at all times. I have bodyguards that are with me every time I go out. This has cost me my job, relationships, lifelong friendships. Everyone's afraid to hang out with you when they know you're a target for the cartels, and it's understandable, but it doesn't make it feel any less shitty. Investigations continued through the beginning of 2017. I later found out through security camera footage that there were 3 SUVs in total, and about 12 people trying to kidnap me. I found out that the cartel that was after me was one of the most powerful in the world, and that the person who was in charge of investigating my case was killed. So right now, I'm working for the Mexican government. It's a low-profile job which doesn't pay much, and doesn't attract too much attention. I've looked for ways to leave the country, but I don't have enough money or qualifications since I'm a college dropout. I'm living with my sister, with people protecting me and my family 24 hours a day, and the guys who tried to kidnap me are still at large. I'm trying to make the best of this situation. I've lost a lot of weight, I spend more time with my nephews, and I recently got into a steady relationship. But honestly, I'm always on edge, and feel like I'm in imminent danger. So to the guys who tried to kidnap me, let's not meet. I retell this story to my friends from time to time, and they seem to be on edge the entire time I'm speaking, so I felt people on this sub would enjoy it even more so. This story took place in 2010 or 2012. To set the scene, I grew up in an upper-class area in upstate New York, but my family was extremely poor and had many financial troubles. During my youth, my mother was a heavy drinker and was often never home, God knows where, with her fellow friends who also abused drugs. The people she associated with at the time used to often come around the house, looking extremely strung out, frail, and out of it completely. I knew they had a habit of asking her for money and favors, so I didn't like them at all. Overall, I knew about the dangers of drug use, and how sketchy people can be very early on in life. I want to say I was between 8 and 10 years old, but my childhood is very much a blur for me because of my environment and the stress of it all. I guess it just got to me. I was home alone one night, as I usually was for most of the time. My mom and dad had gone out together, an extremely rare occasion, so a movie or dinner, and my brother, who was 2 years older, was sleeping at a friend's. I was sitting in the downstairs living room on the couch watching TV, and to the left of me was the wall in which the front door and 3 windows were, which led to the front porch. I hear a knock on the door, which wasn't uncommon because, like I said, my mother's friends were always coming by to ask for money or pick her up, but regardless, it freaked me out because I was home alone. I ignore it, and not even a minute later, I hear a knock on one of the windows facing into the living room. I look to it, and I see a man's face. One hard to describe but very much in mind, looking in at me and smiling extremely eerily. I can't characterize him with physical features, but I feel as though if I saw him on a street today, I would recognize him almost instantly. So looking at me and smiling, he says, "Hi." Open the door, in a very hoarse and demanding voice. For obvious reasons, I get extremely terrified and run to the right of the living room, around the corner, and into this downstairs bathroom we have. I press myself up between the toilet and the wall and begin crying uncontrollably. I'm overcome with fear of what's going to happen. My house is extremely old, and so you hear every creak, every step, every tap, and from where I was in the bathroom, I could hear every movement in and around this house. I heard him jiggle the front door handle, pound on the door, the window, and silence for a minute or so afterwards. I had no intention of moving though, and I'm so thankful that I didn't, because I soon heard the back door swing open and steps going onto my back deck that leads into the kitchen of my home. My kitchen is a side room off of my living room, and the entrance to the kitchen faces the entrance to the bathroom door which I was hiding in. After hearing the back door open and footsteps on the hard wood on my deck, I remember thinking to myself, I really hope my parents lock the back door, as there's another back door that is glass and that opens right into the kitchen. Of course, it wasn't locked. It never was, and that was how we often left and entered through the house. I hear the door open and scrape against the hard wood of my kitchen floor, and I feel myself as though I'm going to actually vomit from fear. I hear the door shut, and steps began to be taken in my kitchen, extremely slowly, as though he was cautious. The man starts whispering, "Andrea? Andrea?" That was my mom's name, and he was looking for her, even though I clearly was not. He walks out of the kitchen, which is raised by a step, and onto the floor that's basically right in front of the bathroom door, in which I'm hiding in complete darkness. In this moment, I felt as though he was going to open the door for sure, switch on the light, see me, and murder me. There was zero doubt in my mind that this was what was going to happen. I've never felt fear like that before in my entire fucking life, and it still gives me chills just writing about it. I think back to my poor child self, and I'm sad that I felt so helpless and terrified so early in life. To my absolute shock and relief, he walks within inches of this door, whispers my mother's name, and continues walking onto the living room. He makes his way to the steps which are directly above the bathroom I'm in, and walks up them. I can vividly hear him calling my mother's name the whole time while doing this, but eventually I can only hear him just walking from room to room, throughout the entire upstairs. I have no idea how long this went on. It felt like an eternity, but in reality, I estimate it lasted around 10 or 15 minutes of him perusing around my house as though he lived there. The entire time this is happening, I'm completely still, and nowhere did I ever consider running to get a phone or running out of the house, as I was completely petrified with fear. After these 10 or 15 minutes, I hear him coming down my steps, make his way into the living room, and he's still whispering my mother's name. He walks from the living room past the bathroom door, into the kitchen, and leaves out the first back door, shutting it on his way out. Then I hear the second back door slam shut. I honestly have no idea how soon after he left I managed to reach a phone, but I do remember grabbing one, going back into the bathroom and calling my parents. They didn't pick up, and I left a voice message of my crying and telling them to please come home. Other than them, I had pretty much no one else who I thought to call. I was a child and I had little phone numbers memorized, and the ones I did have were my friends from school. The only other number I knew was that of my aunt's, who lived 45 minutes away from me but knew of my mother and the people she hung out with, and always told me I could call her whenever. So I call her sobbing and crying. I suppose I managed to explain what had happened to her, because about 5 minutes after hanging up with her, the police arrive at my house, at exactly the same time my parents come home from wherever. My parents were utterly confused and shocked, and the police are questioning them and myself. They absolutely know nothing, and I'm inconsolable and not much is able to be done. I'll honestly hold a grudge at my parents for doing this, because they were the adults and the ones who talked to the police for the most part. They told the police to drop it, and that I was making the entire thing up or that I imagined it all. I have no idea what the fuck was going on when they did this, and I only found out years later when I asked my aunt about it. I'm positive they wanted this to be forgotten about because my mom was involved with illegal drugs at the time, and they didn't want the police or CPS to get involved with my family. This is also why I didn't call the police when I finally managed to reach a phone. I had been taught always that the police had it out for my family and wanted to take my brother and I away from our home, so nothing ever happened about it. No follow-up. My parents never spoke about it to me ever again, and whenever I bring it up to my father, he honestly says he forgot about it happening or doesn't want to talk about it. I don't blame my parents, though. We had a troubled life at the time. A lot happened to all of us during this period of time, and we were just a victim of circumstances, I guess. They were scared too, and though I'll always be upset that they didn't act in a way more concerned or worried, they've shown their love for me throughout my life in many other ways, and I guess I can't let this one little event ruin that relationship. I don't believe that grudges are worth it. My mom died in November on this year unexpectedly. She had been sober since the summer of 2017, so not long, but long for her. It's disheartening that this is one of the memories I think of when I think of her, along with a lot of other shitty things she did when she was drinking. Regardless, I love her and miss her very much, so I wish she was still around so she could enjoy the sobriety she worked so hard for. My life is better now, but this event and my entire childhood has led to me having extreme issues with depression and slight PTSD. I'm in college, happy. My father, brother, and I are all getting along and trying to recover from my mother's death. It's been a tough year, but we're making do. Sorry to make this post so depressing at the end, but I lurk in this sub a lot and I love hearing about the personal details after the encounter. I guess it makes it a lot more human. In 2006, I was a college student at ASU. I lived in an off-campus apartment on the ground floor, and it was a block off a major street here in Phoenix called Baseline. These details are important. In the summer of 2006, Phoenix, Arizona was plagued by 2 serial killers. One was the Phoenix shooter, who ended up being a team of 2 guys randomly shooting people, and the other was the Baseline killer, a rapist and murderer. Having 2 serial killers put the entire city on edge, and everyone was talking about it. I even saw articles in Time or Newsweek about the situation. So in the fall of 2006, the semester had just started. Now you may have heard this, but Phoenix is hot in August. It would get stuffy in my apartment, and so I leave the window cracked a little because the morning air is nice. The blinds provided visual cover. Anyways, one morning a strange sound woke me up. It was the crack of dawn at 4:45 a.m., and the sun was just barely coming up. It was the sound of someone lightly tapping on the window, and it seemed intentional. In my tired state, I figured it could be a bird or some branches or something trivial. Tap, tap, tap. Then silence. After about 90 seconds of nothing, the tapping returned, and I knew it was purposeful. I was positive it was a human producing this noise. I thought it was my boyfriend who thought it was cute to try and scare me sometimes. I decided I'd be a bit of a brat and make him wait, but I was also starting to get really angry. How dare he pull a prank when I'm trying to sleep? This is just like him. I'm going to give him peace of my mind about disturbing my sleep like this. More tapping. At a certain point, I got up to get a glass of water, still being in the mindset of wanting to annoy my stupid boyfriend who thought this would be funny. But I saw some movement through the slit in the blinds, and I marched over and yanked the blind so I could see. Definitely not my boyfriend. What the fuck? He sort of seemed taken aback by my anger, but only slightly. The man I saw will be with me forever, or more specifically, his eyes and the feeling they gave me were insanely creepy. Honestly, words can't do justice to how terrifying his eyes were. They looked like black orbs with no white in them. Absolutely predatory. And when I see pictures of Ted Bundy or Charles Manson, that's exactly what he looked like. Even if you saw a picture of how they looked, it's different when you experience it in person. It totally floored me. I could tell something about this man was profoundly wrong. He was crouched down like an umpire. He had on dark pants, a dark purple shirt, and a dark Nike hat. He had dark skin. I thought he was Hispanic, but later I found out he was a light-skinned black guy. Anyway, after I yelled at him, he whispers to me through the window. Hey, can I talk to you? If you want to know how insanely creepy that is to hear, Just whisper that sentence out loud to yourself right now. It still sends chills down my spine when I think of how it sounded. His hand subtly moved towards his waist. I would later learn that he would blitz attack his victims, and that he probably had a gun. All that separated us was a mesh screen. Now this is about a 3-second interaction at this point. For some reason, I thought of Ted Bundy and how he'd pretend to be crippled to target his victims. I thought of my mom telling me not to be nice to strangers. Don't be afraid to be a bitch. My thinking wasn't as calculated as all that, but it was more the nano-processing of how to deal with the situation. When he whispered that, I started yelling at him again. Hell no, get the fuck out of here, you douchebag! I shut the window angrily and locked it. I can't overemphasize how incredibly irritated I was that this person had the audacity to disturb my previous sleep. I laid back down and wondered if I'd been too mean. What if he needed help? But after I thought about it, that didn't really make sense. Why would he be tapping and whispering if he was truly in trouble? I decided the man was truly a creep after all. I was too annoyed to go back to sleep, but I sort of laid back down. I told my roommate about an hour later, and she jokingly asked if it could have been the baseline killer. When she said that, my heart sank. His face looked exactly like it did in the police sketches that were on the billboards everywhere. The problem is that those billboards showed him with dreads, and the man in my window had no such thing. Apparently, he was some sort of a disguise artist who'd wear wigs. Updating the police sketch would have been a nice move, but they never did. I called the Phoenix police, and the detective I talked to agreed that it sounded like his MO. The suspect would say something to throw off his target, and then he'd blitz attack. The detective said that my angry response probably made me seem like too much of a hassle, so the man moved on. The only problem was that I thought the guy looked Hispanic, and the detective said many witnesses described him as black. I thought they might want to come out and try for samples or surveillance video or something, but I didn't hear back from the detective. My parents freaked out. They got us knives, pepper spray, and put up signs. We learned another tenant had complained that same morning. I never learned the details, but this idiot was apparently going around the whole complex trying to find a target. The stupid apartment wouldn't let us out of our lease, so we moved to a second-floor apartment right above our old unit. Anyways, on September 4th, 2006, they arrested Mark Godot. I think the detective didn't call me back because they were days away from arresting him. When I saw his mugshot, I was sick but also relieved. He was absolutely the man outside my window. To me, he looked like he could be Hispanic. You can judge for yourself if you Google it. He's on death row in Arizona now. His wife tried to mount some campaign to show that the police were framing him or something. On a personal level, it would certainly make for an interesting coincidence if this poor innocent man who they framed was also whispering like a creep and tapping on my window. The other cool thing about this story is that I had a really bad eating disorder at the time, and about 8 months after that I managed to get in a solid recovery. Funnily enough, I never would have experienced how wonderful life could be if the slightest thing would have changed that morning. I can't think of something more scary than a serial killer tapping on your window. That actually happened to me, and if it happens to you, just scare them right back. Don't be afraid to be downright rude to someone who's injecting themselves into your personal space. It could save your life if you're not afraid to throw your weight around and tell someone off. Trust yourself. You can still be a kind and generous person and still tell someone to fuck off. This happened about 6 months ago, and I recently took an Uber for the first time since this incident, so I thought I'd share. I was leaving a work function at a bar around midnight in a large city, about an hour away from the suburban home I share with my partner. For reference, I'm a woman in my mid-20s with an average build. Not tall, not strong, and definitely not threatening. And I was a bit buzzed that night. I'm talking about 3 drinks, so not really incapacitated in the slightest. Anyway, I'd ordinarily take a company car home, but I hadn't reserved one since I didn't know what time I'd be leaving. I decided to just use an Uber. The company reimburses me for the bill anyway, so it was no difference to me. Once the Uber pulls up, I say goodbye to my colleagues and get in the back seat. I'm always very nice to my Uber drivers, so I introduce myself. This driver, let's call him Ed since I actually don't know his real name, seemed totally normal. No red flags, and we make pleasant conversation for about 15 minutes, until we're squarely out of the city on the way to the suburbs. From this pleasant conversation, I learn he lives in a certain neighborhood not far from my home. Note that his neighborhood, while relatively nearby, would be completely out of the way on the route we're taking to my home. The conversation reaches its natural end, so I just stay a bit quiet and start looking at my phone, Reddit, and whatever. The quiet is interrupted by his voice, suggesting that I take a nap if I feel tired. It didn't even strike me as weird at first, so I just thanked him for the offer, but that I wasn't tired. He then said, "Oh, I always get sleepy when I'm drunk. Are you sure?" At this point, something in my body made me even more wide awake than before. I replied that I wasn't drunk, like I had said. I just had a few drinks, so no need to nap. I'd be home soon anyway. He drops it after that, but I still thought it was a weird thing to say. About 5 minutes later, he says that the highway has some weird construction going on, and that the single-lane traffic ahead would make my trip way longer than it needs to be. He asks if it's okay to take another route. I oblige, already on edge and wanting to be home. My partner calls at that moment, asking when I'll be home, and I make sure to make it very clear I was talking to my significant other. Something was weird about this guy, and I wanted him to know that someone was expecting me at a specific time and knows where I am. After I hang up the phone, the Uber driver stays quiet, and we get off the highway on a different exit than I've ever used. I guess that's to be expected, though, on a different route home. I'm bullshitting on my phone because I don't want to talk to this guy anymore, not even looking up until he says, "My house is only 5 minutes from here." Okay. Pit in my stomach. I'm probably a good 25 minutes away from my home right now, a distance enlarged, I'd learn later artificially, by his shortcut. I say some nonsense about how I like the neighborhood, and how my boyfriend and I were thinking of moving here instead. Basically anything I can think of to make it seem like I don't think this is weird, and I'm not picking up any signals. Surprisingly, he doesn't say anything in response, and starts driving on a road in a direction I knew led to my house. Crisis averted, right? Not really. 15 minutes to go and my surroundings are more familiar. Just as I'm starting to feel more at ease, he starts asking questions about my boyfriend. What does he do? How long have you guys been together? And other seemingly normal questions. Finally, with about 10 minutes to go, he asks if my boyfriend makes me happy. He does very much, so I gush a bit. He then asks if I make him happy. I thought it was weird, but humor is my defense mechanism, so I say, well, I should hope so. 8 minutes away, he turns onto a side street and pulls over on the side of the road, looks back over at me over his headrest, and asks if I'd like to make him happy too. What? Mostly because I can't even believe what's happening. He asks again, "Do you want to make me happy tonight?" I took a second to think through my options. I'm alone with this guy who's behind the wheel. The street is dark and I don't see any lights on at nearby houses. It's close to 1 a.m. at this point on a weeknight. And I don't know what the hell this guy has in the car. I default to the response many women know to be the true barrier to men's advances. I don't think my boyfriend would like that very much. His weird grin falls away from his face, and he says, "He doesn't have to find out. Come on, make me happy. I know a few ways you can start." I tell him my boyfriend is expecting me home at any minute, and besides, I love him. I don't want to hurt him, so can you please just take me home? I carry a small knife and a little canister of mace, but I thought it best to appeal to this guy's sensitive side. Somehow it worked, and he didn't say another word after. Just turned back around and silently drove me home. Weirdly enough, I tell him thank you as I get out of the car. Old habits die hard, I guess. And that was that. I go into my house and start crying immediately for some reason, as soon as I hug my partner. He tells me I need to contact Uber immediately, and told him what happened so this guy doesn't try to take advantage of anyone else. I agree and pull up the app to file the complaint. Except, when I looked at my last ride, the picture in the profile was 100% not the guy who drove me home. The car was the same, but not the driver. The guy in the photo was brown and wore a turban, maybe early 40s. The guy who drove me home was white and seemed just a bit older than me. Uber never followed up with me and just refunded my money. I did tell the police what happened because my partner insisted, but they didn't take me seriously since nothing actually happened. I was worried for a while since this guy knew where I lived, but apparently it's long forgotten since I just took an Uber today. Moral of the story: always make sure the photo in your Uber's driver profile matches the person who's driving the car.